That was the haka being performed by a high school in New Zealand. It's a war dance from the country's indigenous Maori people. Not so long ago, many feared their culture would soon die out. But now it seems there's a revival. More New Zealanders are embracing the language, and in a boost, the government has announced plans for Maori to be taught in every school in the country. A few years ago, less than 4% could speak the language. By 2040, the government hopes it will be closer to 20%. So, what's behind this resurgence? Well, to discuss that and more is Ella Henry. She's a senior lecturer in Maori development at the Auckland University of Technology. Ella, good to have you on the Newsmakers. There seems to be a renewal of Maori language in New Zealand. Tell me what's behind it, and are you happy about it?
Well, I'm very happy because the language was on the threshold of extinction. But really what we're seeing now is the end of 40 years of activism on the part of Māori to protect our language. And in recent years, seeing it being embraced by non-Māori people has really been an added bonus.
And I guess the language was synonymous with a culture and a way of life that was conquered, right? And help me understand the stigma related to using the language or even just the expression of the culture in the past.
Well, obviously, one of the things that the British wanted to do when we signed a treaty with them was assimilate us to make us into good British citizens, which unfortunately we were not terribly good at. We had a wee war that did not go well for us. And as a consequence of that, we lost our economic base, and alongside that, legislation was implemented to help us to assimilate faster, and that resulted in the loss of a lot of our cultural characteristics, our language. And so it's really been part of a huge renaissance of the culture in the last 40 years as Māori people have come to live in the cities, have become better educated and more assertive about protecting our culture and our identity, because that's who and what we are.
Is this something that means different things for Maori people and for white New Zealanders? So, for example, when we see the expression of the culture and we see this becoming more mainstream and it being cool to have an association with Maori culture, is it different things for different peoples?
Well, interestingly, we've just had the Māori Language Week in New Zealand, and a number of quite prominent non-Māori European New Zealanders have been speaking out about how knowing the language is actually something that makes them feel more committed to the place as well. It's something that's different from our neighbours in Australia or Canada or the United States, where they also have an Indigenous population. And so they are starting to see and feel the benefits of that unique cultural identity, which they're a part of when they learn the language.
Right. And so you've given us an accurate description of the zeitgeist, the fact that there's a lot of positivity related to this. We saw the Prime Minister also have a couple of videos out on YouTube and elsewhere speaking a few sentences. Is this something that needs to be allowed to develop organically within the society, or is it something that the government needs to give a good big push at?
Well, yes, the government has been required to protect the language under the terms of the treaty, where they guaranteed the protection of all things that were precious. So there is, a strong government support, and this particular government is committed to making the language available as a compulsory subject by 2025. So we are quietly optimistic that what has begun is not just a flash in the pan, but is actually part of a fundamental revitalisation of what it means to be a New Zealander. Many New Zealanders call themselves Kiwi. I think that's a relatively well-known phrase internationally, and that's a Maori word.
Yeah, and so it starts with language. Where does it end? Does it end with a more equal society, a less racist society, a society that is truly more representative?
One would hope so. I mean, we still have, racism issues in this country, and that is proven consistently. I do think, though, that as a nation, we are wrestling with having a conversation across cultures, which I think is the first step in ameliorating racism. The biggest issue for Māori people, of course, is because we have been in the lowest socioeconomic groups for so many decades, we are more likely to be in jail, more likely to die young. So we have a huge job to do to revitalise our economy and our economic foundations. But I think culture is such an important part of self-belief, and that is an enormous contributor to well-being.
And other countries are also wrestling with similar things, similar parallels, whether it's the United States and Native Americans, whether it's the First Nations in Canada. What kind of lesson do you think they can learn from the New Zealand experience?
Interestingly, a number of the Canadian, American, Australian and Pacific Island peoples who are also dealing with language revitalisation have come and learned from our separate education system, our Māori education system, and they have taken that back as far afield as, the Sapmi people of Norway, the people of the States, as we said, in Canada. So we think that Indigenous people working together have a similar agenda: revitalisation of culture and language, rebuilding of economy, and building a more stable place for the future and the way we interact with the dominant culture.
Okay, very finally, Ella, how do I say pleasure to have met you or pleasure to have spoken with you in Maori language?
Well, we tend to have a generic phrase. We're not much for small talk in our language, but we say kia ora, which means be well. And we say it when we meet each other. We say it when we go to, kia ora, be well, be happy.
Okay, Ella, kia ora. I hope my pronunciation's half decent. All the best.
It was absolutely fabulous. Thank you.
Thanks for coming on.